Hello, people. Kirby Obsidian back. Look, there has been almost an assumption for, I guess, 8, 9, going on 10 years now, that MAGA conservatives are so locked in that there's no point in trying to persuade them. And I grant that Trump has a pretty solid hold on a big chunk of the electorate that doesn't seem to be um, willing to turn away from him no matter what he says or he does or however much he violates the law. They are in his camp. And I don't want to pretend to have it all figured out. Not even, I don't know if I have any of it figured out. But one thing that becomes clearer and clearer to me over time is that one of the key issues separating left and right is the issue of otherness, and you might say otherness slash change. That the right seems to be determined to prevent otherness from creeping into taking over American society, and they seem to want to hold on to something that is disappearing. And these are natural feelings, and I'll add to. I know I'm generalizing. I know that not everyone in the right, you know, it's a diverse group of people, just as we on the left are quite diverse. So these are generalizations I'm talking about. But the policies, the stances that MAGA politicians take sure seem to reflect this longing for something that seems to be uh, drifting away in the process of being lost. Some say it's a mostly white America. Some say it's a mostly Christian America. And those do seem to be factors. Uh, but I think it's kind of a more general sense of being afraid of otherness, being afraid of change, in which one feels like they won't be long, won't be comfortable, won't have value, won't have a voice. And it's a natural enough feeling, but it's also a um, a pointless feeling to the degree that, I mean, the change is inevitable, and as this world progresses through the change, the world becomes smaller. We become more and more inevitably connected to others, people who, speak a different language, eat different types of food, pray differently, live differently, have some different value systems. And I think there's much more fear of that on the right than there is on the left. Part of it, I think you can almost see geographically. The West Coast and the East Coast are closer to other parts of the world. Those are the places where people who are coming into the country, where they arrive, where they often settle. So there's more exposure to all this otherness from the rest of the world on the coast, in the big cities, than there is in the rural areas, and than there is in the interior of the U.S. So in some ways, it's not surprising. Also, the the educated classes, those with university degrees and higher, are increasingly associated with the left. And university is, of course, another place where people get exposed to otherness. They get ideas uh, that they weren't exposed to. They brush up against other people from other communities, from other countries, a lot more than those who don't go on to university. So it's not surprising that, again, people who have that experience of college education and beyond are more comfortable in their exposure and their coexistence with otherness. I think a kind of a thought experience, a thought experiment, I think, for people to just kind of show how, you know, all of us are faced with change and how challenging it can be, is imagine if any of us lived 100 years ago, how much we would stick out. Think of how different um, our way of speech would be, our our work experience, our family experience. All of that would be quite a bit different if we lived 100 years ago, 200 years ago, much more so. And don't think so much about, or don't think only about how it would be different to you, but think about how you would be perceived as different in those time periods. You can also do that thought experiment, that thought experiment, just thinking about being plopped down in a community, perhaps 1,000 miles away. Now the United States is big, so you might end up in a place not too different than where you are. But then imagine being on a different continent. How different you would seem. How wary people might be of you just because of some differences, which might turn out to be quite superficial. This seems simplistic. It might seem simplistic, but I really think it's a huge part of our politics these days. Um, Trump is able to spew so many exaggerations, uh, which amount to lies about immigrants, and I think that may be in part because um, there are a lot of communities where maybe there's not a lot of exposure to immigrants, or maybe the only exposure is, if you live in a farm community, maybe your only exposure is to those people who come and work the harvest. You may not have much other contact with them, or maybe perhaps no other contact with them. Whereas again, in universities, in big cities on the coast, many more of us are exposed in many more diverse ways to people coming from other communities, and also those people who we do cross paths with. They aren't merely um, seen in one role. They're not only farm workers. Um, so that we tend to have a broader sense of who these people are who we're rubbing up against. I think these are huge factors, and again, it may be pointless to try to persuade people, but I think it's important. And I'm one of those people who does worry about the future of this country and whether we will be able to go forward as a reasonably united country with somewhat similar values. Right now that seems almost ridiculous to hope for. But as a black American, my whole life experience has been looking at that divide, because as a black American I've always been aware, necessarily so, of the fact that my people were looked down upon by many, and that those many often didn't want us in their communities, working in their workplaces, dating their daughters or sons, uh, going to their churches, etc., etc., etc. That's always been a part of America from my perspective, but in my lifetime, I've mostly felt like those divides were lessening, that um, understanding was growing, acceptance was growing. And I've had lots of personal experiences where I've seen those barriers coming down or becoming thinner, easier to negotiate. When I was a kid, I lived in an all-black community for the first several years of my life in Detroit, Michigan. Um, but then I had the good fortune, I see it as great good fortune, that my parents found their way to New York City. I was there for a number of years. Then we found ourselves as a family in Germany, both East Germany and West Germany. I got to experience a little bit of other places in Europe, then back to New York City. Then I went away to school in a school that was, uh, a very elite school. So with a lot of people from a class I didn't have much experience with, you know, very wealthy, well-traveled people. Um, so I've had so many situations through my life of being exposed to otherness. Um, my first wife was a woman from St. Kitts in the Caribbean. Um, in our life together, we were together for 10 years. I was very much in the environment of her family. She was very close to her family, and so I had that experience. And believe me, it was kind of one of the things that was interesting about that experience. When I first went to St. Kitts, it was my first time ever in a black nation, and that moved me, and I felt like, I getting off the plane, it was like, brothers and sisters, I've come home. I almost felt like that. But to them, I was just a dude from someplace else, and the fact of being black didn't matter a whole lot. I mean, the whole society there was black, and so that meant not very much. Um, since then, I've been now 23 years married to a woman from Poland, and have had been very heavily exposed to her community of Poles living in Canada. That's been another different community to experience, and so I've learned to exist pretty comfortably, um, in some ways even more comfortably than in my own black communities of like Detroit, where I came from. I don't have a lot of connection there anymore. I still have family there, but we we aren't very closely connected. Um, and I guess there are lots of reasons for that. But let's the bottom line is I've just become very comfortable with otherness in a way that I think a lot of other people are not. And what one learns is that otherness is not so scary. People on the surface may seem quite different, but as you get to know them, you recognize that they are not so different. Hi, this is a day after what you were just listening to, and I didn't wrap it up, so I just kind of want to wrap it up. The point of all this is that otherness is not so scary, it's not so destructive. Um, Change happens. Our communities, our families were not the same 100 years ago, 200 years ago, as they are now. From the perspective of 200 years ago, they might look at us and say, my God, what have we become? Um, but it's been a natural growth, a natural progression, and it's going to continue forward, and we needn't be so afraid of it. There's this kind of wave of nationalist fervor all around the world, and it seems to mostly be about kind of preserving our population, our culture as it is now. Um, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, it's not going to be the same as it is now. And we don't have to be fighting every step of the way. And the same applies to technology. And yes, it's going to be difficult changing from a fossil fuel economy to a renewable energy economy, because people will have to let go of some old skills and take on some new skills. Um, we don't have blacksmiths anymore because there's no need. There was maybe a time when the blacksmiths were up in arms. You're taking away our business, our livelihood. But okay, cars came along, some different skills developed. Um, that's going to continue to happen. And so much of our politics seems to be uh, tied to this notion of let's stay the same, or even better, let's go backwards a couple of generations to when things were so beautiful, which they weren't. At least from my perspective, it wasn't all golden. There were problems then too. Nostalgia can be a beautiful way we have of distorting our memory. Anyway, I look forward to your comments. I'll leave it at that for now. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Happy solstice. The days are getting longer here in the Northern Hemisphere. Bye for now, folks. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your subscribing and likes and your comments and all that. I very much appreciate it. Bye for now.